that we started the whole journey around CMMC with a white paper last year, and that white paper led to a lot of action and discussion about following up on that. So we wanted to make sure that they're back to tell the progress. As I've shared with many of you before, it's a journey that matters, and this is an important journey for us in this industry. And let Stuart introduce the panelists and take it away from here. Up to you, Stuart.
Thank you. So our session this afternoon is entitled Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Journey Continues. And we're going to get into the specifics of CMMC, or the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program, in just a bit. This is a discussion that originated a year ago at last year's Cyber Futures Summit and was subsequently followed by a white paper. And this is a continuation of that discussion that we have started. My name is Stuart Itkin. I am the Vice President for CMMC in FedRAMP Assurance with Coal-Fire Federal. We are a broad compliance and cybersecurity consulting firm. We are a C3PAO, or a third-party assessor for CMMC, as well as a CMMC registered provider organization, and also a 3PAO for FedRAMP, and are the largest FedRAMP 3PAO in the industry. With that, let me have my fellow panelists introduce themselves. Reagan?
There we go. Hi, my name is Reagan Edens, and I am the Chief Compliance Officer for DTC Global, which is a specialty advisory firm for DFARS and CMMC requirements. I was fortunate enough to be selected as a volunteer member of the CMMC Accreditation Body's Board of Directors formerly, and led the Standards Management Committee. Currently, I am, along with Stuart, a founding member of the CMMC Industry Standards Council, and we're focused on developing safe harbor for the defense industrial base.
Reagan, Stuart, good to be with you. I'm Matt Travis, and I am the CEO of the Cyber AB, which is the CMMC accreditation body. We are a 501c3 organization that is the exclusive and sole partner of the Department of Defense to implement and oversee CMMC. So at our core, we accredit those third-party assessor organizations, and our subsidiary, the CAICO, the Cybersecurity Assessor and Instructor Certification Organization, certifies professionally those individuals who serve as assessors and instructors in the CMMC ecosystem. Before I got into CMMC, I was the Deputy Director of CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and I always look forward to talking to CMMC, so I appreciate the organizers and Stuart for pulling this panel together.
Very good. Well, thank you, and thank you for joining us. Well, CMMC is about third-party risk. And every year when we look at the top three concerns that CISOs have, third-party risk is always one of the top three. Phishing and insider threat tending to be the other two that we really see. And if we look at the DoD supply chain, the DoD supply chain is not an exception to that for third-party risk, but perhaps in some respects it really is an exception in terms of some of its characteristics and some of its challenges. The direct supply chain to the DoD, generally referred to as the DIB, or the Defense Industrial Base, consists of somewhere between 350,000 and 400,000 organizations. Again, this is the direct supply chain that is providing things like weapons, tools, and so forth, not the supply chain that's providing copy paper and so forth to support the organization. And about 80,000 of these organizations in the direct supply chain fall into a special category in which they are entrusted with sensitive information, or information that is referred to as CUI, or controlled unclassified information, which has a great deal of value, not only to ourselves, but certainly to our adversaries. Last year, and kind of as a consequence of the white paper, there were a series of takeaways that we summarized, and I think it's a foundation for the discussion that we want to have today. First, security of the DIB is critical to national security, yet different probably from any other supply chain, and we'll dig into that a little bit more. Second, And this is a bit of a contradiction in some respects, but the defense industrial base is underinvested in cybersecurity. It's constantly targeted by adversaries, and unfortunately, many of those attempts to penetrate those organizations is successful. And when I say underinvested, the DIB on average spends about 1% to 2% of revenue on cybersecurity. And if we look at the industry averages, it's about 6% to 8%. And so it's a several 100% difference. Third, the efforts of the defense industrial base to be able to secure itself, or largely the efforts of the DoD, have been unsuccessful at this point. The regulation, the DFARS, or Defense Federal Acquisition Supplement, that is generally referred to as 7012, is one that mandates requirements for organizations in the DIB to follow. And unfortunately, those organizations just have not followed them consistently throughout the organization. The reasons we found, and kind of the next point, was that the DIB really doesn't know how to implement cybersecurity. It's not capable of implementing cybersecurity from the standpoint of having the IT resources, the information security resources, the compliance resources, and really the risk management expertise that is required. And we know that security isn't free, and the lack of resources, the lack of funding is a key challenge. And the final conclusion was that the solution to the problems that were identified are going to ultimately require public-private partnerships, and kind of through the development of what we referred to in our white paper as safe harbors, or predefined, pre-canned solutions that can be adopted by organizations within the DIB. And so rather than creating 300,000 individual DIY projects for DIB organizations to implement security and satisfy these minimum requirements, being able to pool those efforts and create solutions that they can more easily move into. Well, kind of back to the problem that, that we started about. The CMMC program, which Matt will be telling us more about, originated within the acquisition and sustainment portion of the Department of Defense. And a number of people made the issue that security, cybersecurity of the DIB really wasn't an acquisition problem, and that it more appropriately in the CMMC program, more appropriately belonged within the office of the DoD CIO. I kind of raised the question, is this really true? Is it a procurement problem or not? And we go back to the point that DIB organizations are only spending 1% to 2% of their revenue on cybersecurity. Now, our company, Coal-Fire Federal, we also do government contracting. A lot of the procurements or the RFPs that we see come in as best value. And so somebody who can satisfy the requirements, but ultimately provide, through a little bit more complex algorithm, the best alternative. But still overwhelmingly, the procurements, the RFPs that we see are what are referred to as LCAT, or LCTA, I'm sorry, or lowest cost technically acceptable solution. As long as you can indicate that you've satisfied the technical requirements, the lowest cost will tend to win. And the intention of this was to really protect the government, to ensure we don't have $1,000 toilets and $500 hammers. And the belief was that lowest cost technically acceptable was in the best interest of the government and really served its need. But again, are we dealing with a procurement problem? And let me ask Reagan, what are some of the consequences that come out of looking at lowest cost goods in making procurement decisions? And how does that affect kind of the quality of the products and services that the government is receiving?
So thanks, Stuart. So that's one of the real challenges, and we look back to our lineage through MITRE and Bob Metzger's work on Deliver on Compromise. And the challenge that faces us is that if the U.S. taxpayers are spending, $1 trillion cumulatively over 3 decades on a particular weapon system, and during the production of the development and production of that weapon system, that the vast majority of those components are and follow underneath the technical data related to controlled and classified information. So the challenge for us is that the vast ocean of suppliers contributing to these major weapon systems, that data is compromised routinely. They are the delivery of products and services out the door is the sole function of their IT systems, with little to any concern for cybersecurity at all, and it's just a means of production. Understandably so from the private sector's view, but the reality is that we're facing, as we all know, an egregious and pervasive threat. So I think when we look at it with a cold and calculated eye, that the investment focusing on, in the terms of the contract, is the delivery of the products and services, but not having an equitable accounting or equitable weight for the fact that the ability to secure the data during that development and production process really short circuits the expectations of the taxpayer and, of course, Department of Defense. The weapon system has to be delivered uncompromised, or these products and services. So I think the challenge for us, Stuart, is looking at that realization that from an acquisition perspective, that we can, through a contractor's lens or contracting officer's lens, is have the weight of the ability to deliver uncompromised as compelling or more compelling than the actual parameters of the actual contract itself.
We talk about compromise. I mean, what are some of the consequences then of something procured by the DoD that has been compromised? And when we look at it, if the overall objective was to look at a solution that was going to save money for the government, I mean, it's really the economy of false economy when we look at risk and cost overall.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, let's say, for example, the major weapon systems and the problems that we see in compromised. And it's not really the prime contractors. They've done their homework. But we look at the stealth bomber, the F-35, the two major weapon systems through the Navy that were compromised. These are cumulatively multi-trillion-dollar programs over 3 or 4 decades of research and development and production and delivery. The F-35 is an amazing aircraft, warfighting capability with 19 partner nations around the world. It's literally defending freedom around the entire globe. And the reality is that at almost 1,900 prime contractors, that equates to literally tens of thousands of tier suppliers distributed globally. So if we take that, again, with a cold and calculating eye, the reality is that the vast majority of those tier suppliers are ubiquitously vulnerable and have been over the last decade of production. So we are embracing that and leaning into that with the D4 7012 and NIST 800-171 requirements and the upcoming CMMC third-party certification. But this is a knot that is so difficult to untie, because the layers upon layers of complexity with the challenges that we all face with knowledge, skills, and abilities shortages. The layering of technology, the sophistication of defense industrial-based companies to actually even apply or afford those technologies, the challenges of managed services to meet these requirements. So all of those things that we face every day within the corporate enterprise or DoD contractor enterprise now is exacerbated at the multi-tier contract levels. And I think someone told me the other day that the F-35 goes down to 46 different tiers when they string out the entire supply chain. So I think that we have to be, again, very deliberate when we talk about what we have to do to prevent compromise of these weapon systems, but then the challenges that we literally face from the tier 1 supplier all the way down to the lowest tier.
So this is really kind of a challenging equation to be able to address. And I know there's been some debate, whether within the procurement process, cybersecurity should become a 4th pillar, kind of added to cost, schedule, in performance, in essence saying we'd be trading cybersecurity against cost, schedule, and performance. And it would kind of make the issue of the choice between, should we be looking at and requiring the level of security that is required, whatever the cost, or should we look at this level of security that a bid can support and still remain competitive? And Matt, I mean, isn't this the question that is really settled by CMMC? And isn't this where CMMC comes in?
It does, Stuart, and a lot of people refer to CMMC as a compliance regime, and not to get like a grammar nerd. I see it more as a conformance regime. So what I tell companies in the defense industrial base, if you're in the market of supporting the Department of Defense with technology or services, market conditions have changed, and the Department of Defense now only do business with those partners who meet this standard, and that standard is CMMC, which is based on the NIST 800-171 standard, 110 at level 2 practices. And what the department's saying, Stuart, is we're not going to now balance that off cost, performance, and schedule. There is a standard you need to meet if you expect to do business with DoD, and that includes the primes, and as Reagan was saying, all the way down to the subs. And so what in effect CMMC is probably the most ambitious supply chain cybersecurity conformance regime ever attempted when you think about the size of the defense industrial base, but also when you think about what's at stake within the sector, that if you do not attain that standard, you are not eligible to win DoD awards. Now, if you're new to CMMC, all this is not yet in place. We're still going through federal rulemaking, so none of these requirements are live yet, but they very well will be live here sometime, we hope, in the first half of 2023. And for the longest time, I think industry has thought, well, this, they're talking a lot, this is never going to happen, it's aspirational. It is going to happen, and the department, to Reagan's point, no longer treats cybersecurity as a term and condition on the back of a contract, right? That's how this all started, that when we realized that cyber threat actors, China, Russia, were eating our lunch, not by compromising the .mil, not by penetrating classified systems, but by going after the low-hanging fruit, which is in the supply chain. And you can glean so much information about the F-35 or other weapon systems through unclassified contracts, that is where the compromises were occurring. So initially DoD was saying, okay, well, we're going to make implementation of cybersecurity hygiene a term and condition of your contract. And I'm speaking generally here. A lot of companies said, okay, that's fine. On any contract, we attest on the T's and C's that we pay our taxes, we use E-Verify, we file this, we do this. Yeah, we do cybersecurity, sure, that's great. All right, so that didn't work. We were realizing that the department was realizing that these practices were not being implemented. So then the next step was, okay, we are going to require you to self-attest legally in a system of record where you have to do a self-assessment, log into a DoD IT system, and attest that you have implemented those requirements that we put in your contract. Well, let's see if that works. Well, again, generally speaking, while some companies within the sector certainly did that, many companies either did the self-assessment, with not the rigor that you would need, or frankly, didn't do it and just, type something in to meet the requirement. Because there wasn't any score is all you had to do. There was no, you have to get this score. You just had to self-assess and attest to that. So that wasn't working. So what is CMMC? CMMC is the validation that you've done that by a third party. And so if you're going to get CMMC certified, it's not you saying that you're doing it. It is a third-party organization that my organization accredits, coming on site and virtually and making you prove that you've implemented those 110 practices. To me, Stuart, that answers that question. That the department is clearly articulating that there is a standard now that must be met. Cost, schedule, performance are all still going to be determined in making the award, but no one gets an award if they don't meet the standard.
When we look at CMMC, I think it needs to be looked in the context that the problem of securing the DIB, that mission that's a big challenge. CMMC won't get us all the way there, will it? I mean, we need to look at it kind of as a step.
No, this is all about managing digital risk, and no one's saying that these 110 practices within the NIST 800-171 are, former Navy here, watertight, right? There's still, companies can still get compromised, but in terms of a risk management framework, this is a pretty good place for everyone to be. 800-171 doesn't require you to invest in quantum computing and AI and have all these, really robust security. It's the basic blocking and tackling of cybersecurity. And so it's not about making us impenetrable within the DIB. It is to manage risk. And frankly, it's something that companies heard earlier today, should be doing on their own, regardless of whether or not they hold a DoD contract.
And just to amplify that a little bit, because it's something that you cue me to, Matt, is that really what CMMC is doing is really taking uniformity and consistency to the modern industrial age. Because remember, when we have the means of production during the early industrial age, now that we're in the digital age, the industrial age has not really kept up. When you talk about the vast majority of tier suppliers, those, as I mentioned previously, IT and even security are a means of production. They're not necessarily intended, and production and delivery. They're not necessarily intended to secure the data in itself, nor the business processes, the way that they manage data and handle that data, the way that they safeguard the data during their business production and their processes. And what we're doing is we're level setting that like we would on any other standard, a quality standard, as a means of safeguarding the data. And I think that that's equitable when we talk about Industry 4.0 and we talk about IT and Internet of Things, and we talk about OT, and we talk about all these innovations on the production line. The reality is that the vast majority of tier suppliers are trailing on the security of all of those devices. So the more that we advance forward in Industry 4.0, as the commercial market is compelling, the more we lag behind the ability to secure those devices. So the reality is there has to be a forcing mechanism, and I applaud the DoD for doing it as a national function of national security, of forcing that standard of cybersecurity from this very wild, inconsistent practices and blocking and tackling this wide disparity across the industrial base to a uniform and consistent measure in order to qualify for your contract.
And so we've put in place, we've defined a program whose intent is to be able to secure the information that is entrusted with organizations across the defense industrial base. But I go back to some of the conclusions in our white paper that specifically indicated that organizations across the DIB, and again, of the 80,000 that handle CUI, 73% of those organizations are small and medium businesses. And so they lack the IT resources, the information security resources, the capability to be able to adopt this. They certainly lack, in many cases, the financial resources. Security is not free. And again, we elaborated a whole series of some of these challenges that DIB organizations have. And if we're unable to solve this problem, great having a framework, but if organizations aren't capable of addressing it. So the conclusion that we reached in our white papers was that there needed to be the creation of safe harbors, the ability to provide solutions that really address the challenges that DIB organizations face. And this really wasn't a set of suggestions. And when we wrote the white paper, we weren't saying, hey, here's some good ideas, and we hope somebody reads this and picks it up and does something. But rather, this was a call to action and kind of a blueprint for industry. And Reagan, can I ask, how has industry responded as a consequence of kind of picking up the call that we need to develop these public-private partnerships and build these safe havens so that organizations in the defense industrial base are capable of meeting the requirements of CMMC?
Well, from my time on the board and leaning forward very hard into this problem set in 2020, there is a coalition of the willing within the CMMC ecosystem that has done amazing work. Folks that are really tackling and diving deep into these problem sets to try to solve a problem that they really don't own from their individual perspective, but out of a sense of duty and mission. And it's wonderful to walk through the challenges of this side by side with folks like you, Stuart, and many others when the CMMC Industry Standards Council. The reality is that it really is taking a very hardcore group of very committed folks to really drive solutions and to drive thinking about how to make this scale. We all recognize the challenge. I mean, the last 2 days has been about all of the challenges that we face together, both on the commercial side and on the defense side. The reality is what are we going to do about it? And so when we understand and we embrace the challenges as they are, then we have to accept the challenges that's going to take to actually do something about it. So I think that the public-private partnership, the AB, has been an outstanding organization. I'm honored to be a part of it for the first 2 years, and in Matt's leadership, and driving the certification and the accreditation of these organizations that are doing this, because this is an immensely difficult task. The other side of this is the independent organizations out there, and the CMMC Industry Standards Council has provided some leadership to bring that coalition of the willing of a team of teams, to quote one of my mentors, General McChrystal, and that team of team approach into facing this issue, tackling it, and again, doing something about it. The reality is that the defense industrial base, just like every one of your companies and all the companies that you know, is completely overwhelmed by the problem. They have, they have products and services that they have to get out the front door, and yet they face this inevitability. And the inevitability is that they have to meet these requirements. And the requirements are complex, they don't understand them, and they are ill-equipped, just like many of the organizations that you know out there, to really face this issue. So the reality is that I think that the DoD has really done a great job to recognize that industry has a role in meeting these challenges. And the consortium that we put together in the Industry Standards Council is really willing to do that and work with the AB and many other organizations, along with the DoD, to do something about this, to make this scalable, to make an average small, mid-sized company achieve these, understand the requirements, implement the requirements, and then achieve the appropriate certification and be able to certify. And I'm very fortunate that a company that we've been supporting through the Texas Manufacturing Assistance Center called AeroGlen was one of the first four voluntary companies to go through the voluntary assessment program. And they did it. It's a 75-person company. They are a Bell helicopter supplier, and AeroGlen spent the last 2 years, along with some assistance from TMAC and implementation guidance that we've written, and did this. And they did it. And they broke that seal. And they are able to demonstrate that the average small, mid-sized company that's committed to doing their, putting in the sweat equity, can do this on a tight budget and execute this. So now that we've already sort of pierced that veil, then the idea is, how do we take the things that have worked and make them scale? And so that's really what Industry Standards Council is all about.
I think that when we talk about this coalition of the willing, there are some awfully powerful partners that have joined us in this fight. It includes organizations like Amazon Web Services and Microsoft and Google. And to see these organizations all coming together, managed service providers, technology companies, recognizing the importance of the mission and coming together to help address it is, I think, just a really positive indication. We've gotten off to a good start, but there's a lot of work to be done. Absolutely. So Matt, let me ask you, before you were leading the Cyber AB, you were at CISA, and third-party risk, as you mentioned, is not the exclusive problem of the Department of Defense. Does CMMC provide kind of a blueprint or a roadmap for other agencies across government? And then ultimately, what about for commercial businesses?
Sure. And when I was at CISA, and certainly we were watching what DoD was doing with CMMC, it really, as DoD often does, kind of, leading the trailblazing, because supply chains across the federal civilian executive branch, supply chains even to, certainly international partners, if not even state and local governments, are still at issue. They're still at risk there. Maybe it's not as acute or pronounced as the risk to the defense industrial base, but there's still digital risk residing in all of the supply chains that support the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Commerce. And so the nice thing about CMMC, when the department announced the 2.0 version of it last November, they stripped away some of the customizable requirements that were on top of NIST 800-171 and is now directly aligned to NIST 800-171, which makes it more easily adoptable. Because I do think that when you look at what it's considered at least the gov contracting sector, all the industry that supports the federal government, there needs to be a unifying standard for cybersecurity for industry. And I do believe 800-171 is it. I think it covers down all the bases. It's not perfect, but it's comprehensive. It addresses, and it stems all from, early on with 853 and FISMA and all of that. So I won't get into the legacy of it, but it is a very good standard. And it's, again, not asking companies to do anything that's, out of the ordinary. It is what you would consider to be very reasonable security practices, access control, configuration management, all those, multi-factor authentication, all those things that will take away a lot of the risk. So what I'm hoping is that eventually, and I think you're seeing the White House exert some leadership through the National Security Council with convening an interagency policy committee to look at how does the federal government ensure the integrity of unclassified information from its industrial base. Because it would be crazy talk to have an end state where NASA has this standard for industry and DHS has this standard for industry and DoD, because a lot of these companies support many government agencies. I think over time we will get to that unifying standard. I think 800-171 is it, but even, as Reagan, NIST is always looking at how do we update that standard. Cybersecurity, just as technology itself continues to evolve and things like zero trust and how to deal with the cloud and how to deal with managed service providers, there's more room to address with greater fidelity how cybersecurity needs to, counter some of that risk and some of these vectors. And so I do hope that we'll see in the coming years a confluence of consensus within the federal space about what the standard should be for industry. And we hope CMMC kind of is the proof of concept that you can have a third-party conformity regime that is scalable, that relies on the ingenuity of industry, and that is cost-effective and has real impact.
And that was really, I think the objective back with the original Obama executive order to unify the handling of controlled unclassified information really across government rather than independent agency and department approaches to being able to handle it. And so we've talked about certainly the problem being ubiquitous, that CMMC providing a path or a solution that others can follow. Reagan, what about the solution that we've identified? Will the public-private partnerships be as important for other parts of government? And does it represent a solution that's viable to bring into commercial businesses?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. In that, when we look at the ITAR, or we look at EAR restricted categories, when we look at the ITAR in particular, it's a 28-year compliance regime. It is very, very technical for those of you who may not know anything about it. It's very technical. It's convoluted. There are inconsistencies and idiosyncrasies within the language. All of these things have made it very difficult for the common small, mid-sized business to adopt, even being patriotic, even being well-intended in order to try to meet the requirements. They just don't understand them. And they can't afford consultants at $275 an hour to explain to them what the U.S. government wants them to do. So what I see for CMMC in particular is I see that as a coalition of compliance regimes when we're talking about data governance and data management in particular, as is ITAR and EAR restricted categories, is a category of controlled and classified information underneath the CUI registry. So what I see in the future is the opportunity for State Department, DDTC, to be able to capitalize on the implementation of the CMMC and the DFARS requirements right now for controlled and classified information, but the third-party certification in particular, because they can bring the depth and breadth and reach of the ITAR and the EL restricted categories into the common business, defense industrial based business, because all of those requirements align by law. They have to, but the specialty and unique requirements, if the base level is set using CMMC and DFARS, then now you can just add on the idiosyncrasies related to the ITAR and then those enhanced requirements that are unique to that data category. So I think that when we talk about how do we make data governance real, like how do you make that real? It's an easy thing to talk about. We love talking about securing our systems. We talk about cultural change, but the reality is, I think that what we're seeing is the digital transformation of the defense industrial base driven by compliance. And that is strictly focused on compliance, cybersecurity, and data governance. And those three pillars really will provide, I think, a transformative foundation for culture in U.S. companies. And then as CMMC is carried through the defense industrial base globally, you're going to see that transformative sort of compelling force going globally. So I think it is a combat enabler, from a former Army Ranger's perspective, in that CMMC provides the ability to take data governance and data compliance down to the average small and mid-sized company. And once we crack the code, and and the implementation guides, which we have worked very hard over the last 2 years, once we developed out of this CMMC Industry Standards Council and other organizations that those prescribed solutions that scale, now you have the equipping, enabling of small and mid-sized business to do this, not by exception, but by norm.
And I just want to go back, though, to a point that Matt made earlier, where he said that this is not a compliance framework. And when the CMMC program was initially introduced, there was an emphasis on don't think compliance, don't think about checking the box. You need to think about cyber maturity, kind of the middle two words within CMMC as being the key focus, and not thinking about how do I check the box, but building a mentality where organizations think about the information, appreciate the value of what they've created, think about the value of what they've been entrusted with, and care about and ensuring that they've applied the appropriate level of security to protect the government's information and really to protect the valuable information that they themselves have created. Well, I know we're just about at the end of our session here. We could probably go on and talk about this topic for easily another hour or more. What I'd like to certainly acknowledge is that the three of us and the organizations that we represent, without question, the Cyber AB, DTC Global, and Coal-Fire Federal, are committed to this mission of ensuring that the DIB becomes secure and that we're protecting the sensitive information those organizations are entrusted with. I'd like to thank Matt for certainly for joining us today, to thank Reagan for your time today, but also to thank all of our comrades in arms. And again, a lot among this coalition of the willing that Reagan referred to, that have taken up this mission and recognize the importance of and are committed to the mission of securing organizations across the DIB. So thank you. Thank you for the time today.